Hey now, welcome to the Dirty Side of the Track. It's America's leading Formula One podcast. I'm Brian, that's Rob. We had an amazing Canadian GP today. We are so excited you're with us. Rob, tell everyone what they can look forward to in today's amazing episode.
Well, the first thing they can look forward to is not an introduction with you rapping, which is a real improvement from last time out. So
hey, I had two people tell me it wasn't as bad as they thought it would be.
Yeah, okay. And you're related to both of them. Well,
only one is my mom, but all right.
So this week, as usual, news and social. Then we'll get down into picking the bones out of what was a fabulous Canadian Grand Prix. And we've got a dial-in from Pit Lane Paul, as always. We have a 100 Seconds of DRS guest. And then a little teaser trailer of what might be coming next week. We're going to save that towards the end a little bit. So winding it all the way back to the beginning of the week, Brian and I had a crazy idea to decide to not just try to dominate the airwaves, but we're going to dominate everything. So we launched a blog this week. People might have seen it. We've got it out there on the website. It's the Dirty Side Deck Chair, which... did we give away the tip of the hat here as to why it's called the deck chair, Brian? I think we do, right?
Yeah, you should.
Let's go down there. So when we started this podcast, we had two names that were up in the air that made it through to the final two, which is obviously the Dirty Side of the Track. We also really like the picture of Fernando Alonso sitting on his deck chair, just kind of perusing all things F1 in front of him. So the other name that was up for discussion was the F1 deck chair. That one landed on the cutting room floor, but we decided we needed to kind of bring it back to life. So the blog is now the Dirty Side Deck Chair. So you can see that on our website. Please go check it out. We're going to try and drop something every Wednesday. So yeah, that'd be cool.
So, and Rob, we should probably tell people in case they don't know, dirtysideofthetrack.com. Click blog. It'll take you right there. We'll always highlight it on our Twitter account. We did have some other ideas, I'll say this, right? Like the blog is a great idea. And we got into tires. Rob did an excellent job. It'll often be probably Rob more so than me, but because I don't type real good. But so as we look at it, we did have some other ideas. One was, Airbnb is so big. We thought we could do Air DNF and it would just be camping under a Ferrari. But we decided since, they seem to have a little better power unit this week, we won't go Air DNF. And then, I had an idea where it was going to be an OnlyFans of Rob seductively looking into the camera saying double diffuser. But then we realized that would have an audience of 0. So we passed on the OnlyFans and the Air DNF and instead went with the blog. So I hope people enjoy. It was a banger of a first week. And then one thing we are really excited about is Pit Lane Paul has, as we mentioned briefly on one, but now we're actually, kind of a call to arms. Paul has agreed to answer questions from Dirty Siders. So we've gotten a couple, or actually more than a couple, we got a handful. So thank you so much to everybody who submitted. But the timing, with the chaos of the upcoming races, we're going to do this during the summer break. So please continue to submit your questions. dirtysideofthetrack@gmail.com. Feel free to send an audio clip of yourself asking the question or just text in the email body would be fine. But Paul, thanks for doing this. We will have a chance for listeners to ask their questions of Paul and he will respond somewhere in the mid-season break. So we're just super, super excited about it.
Yeah, and a quick shout out. I think we've had Stu, Renato, and then Matthew from China and Tao from China, and I think it's only Matthew so far that has actually gone all in and sent us an audio file. So he's laid the gauntlet down. The rest of you can follow. But if we can get some in, then yeah, the idea will be that as F1 packs up for the summer, we will have a kind of our review of the race, which hopefully will be myself, Brian, and Paul kind of having a three-way conversation about what we've made of the season so far, and then Paul will answer all the questions that come through. So that will be that. Talking of Paul, so Paul took a bit of a detour, as he mentioned on his phone-in last week. He was supposed to fly from Azerbaijan hopefully straight to New York. I was going to hope to meet up with him before he moved on to Canada, but that didn't happen. He went back to the UK and then straight from the UK to Montreal. And when he got there, his luggage didn't join him. So anybody that follows him on social media will have seen his Instagram reel where he's tried to buy the minimum amount of clothes that he could with about $30 around Montreal. So at least he made it. Unlike Charles Leclerc, who missed his flight to Montreal. So things didn't really start out too well for the week for him. So as well as kind of missing out on any points in Azerbaijan. He then missed his flight as well. So not a great week back there for Charles, really.
Well, and then they kept the whole debate all week was what's going to happen with their power unit. What kind of penalty will they take? Will they need one? Can they reuse a turbo from an old engine? Can they MacGyver it together with duct tape and baling wire like Yuki Tsunoda's rear wing? And so everyone was very excited, and Fantasy was tuned in carefully to see what happened. And at first, it was just a couple unit parts of the unit, so 10 place grid drop. And then the people at Ferrari rethought it and said, "Why? If we're in for a penny, in for a pound, might as well just redo all the pieces." And so he brought in a full new power unit and started at the back, which we will get to in a minute. But that was an interesting debate all week to kind of watch what will Ferrari do with Charles' power unit.
Yeah, and I mean, like you say, it had a massive impact on what was going to go on in Fantasy, which we'll pick the bones out of that one later because it definitely played into my strategy, which sucked. Anyway.
Played into my strategery as well, which also sucked.
Okay, so then keeping the flight theme going, Ryanair decided to cash in on the whole liked by Pierre Gasly meme that's going around at the moment because he seems to like everything. And a Twitter user came back and said, yeah, you should actually sponsor AlphaTauri. And they tweeted back and said, Ryanair livery in F1, nice. Haas F1 team would be in our budget range. So, a little bit of a side swipe at Haas there. But fair play to the Haas social media team that came back with, nah, you're okay. We had enough of finishing last in our destination last year. I do like it when companies go head-to-head with each other. It was pretty cool.
I've always heard Ryanair, so I've never flown Ryanair.
Budget airline.
Super budget, right? I've heard they even charge for the bathroom. Is that correct or no?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they charge for everything. I think oxygen is charged for. I mean, you basically... it's kind of like, the Fred Flintstone car where he has to pedal it with his feet underneath.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like you have to flap your arms to make the wings go.
We have Spirit here in the States, and they make you unload your bags from the plane. They take 4 or 5 volunteers, and they bring you out on the tarmac, and you have to toss your bags out. But, no, all right, sorry. So the FIA, one of the other big topics this week was the whole porpoising thing, and the idea that the FIA would get involved. And last week, we were pretty adamant on this here channel at this here time, talking about should they get involved and what should they do. But we both agreed, Rob and I actually came to an agreement that at no point should they penalize any team who's gotten the design right. So it was not something they'd want to do to the entire playing field, but rather could they put in some kind of restriction on the teams who had the porpoising, forcing them to change ride height or fix what they need to do so as to not endanger the drivers. And that's exactly what they did. They just didn't do it for this week. They effectively said, look, we're going to modulate, we're going to monitor and watch and make you modulate so the up and down, the sort of top to bottom inertia on the driver is minimal or at a certain level. We're going to measure it, and we're going to figure out how to measure it, and then we're going to figure out a rule. And then they said, oh, no, by the way, this won't be for this week, even though they kind of said it was at first. It was a very bizarre implementation, but I do like where they're going, if I'm being totally honest.
Yeah, I mean, it was a weird one, like it was just to try to buy some kudos with the teams and the drivers, because they came out and went, yeah, we've got this short-term fix where we're going to do this thing. There's going to be this metric that measures stuff with a highly scientific calculation, and we'll get the teams involved in everything. And then long-term, we're going to fix it properly. I was like, okay, cool. So you're going to get something short-term. Yeah, short-term-ish. I mean, it's not going to be for this week. And we haven't really come up with what the calculation's going to be. But, I mean, we're on it. Double thumbs up, guys. We've got your back. And I was like, I'm sorry, that's just a whole bunch of crap. I mean, you've just come out to say something. What you really mean is you've got an intention to look at this eventually, and you'll get the teams involved. And the kind of idea is it's going to be to kind of restrict the modulation, but there's no short term in this. I bet I'm not even 100% sure we're going to see anything for Silverstone, because by the time they come up, they've got to get all the teams to chip in on some calculation that they're probably all going to have to agree on. And when do all the teams agree on anything?
Well, and there's only going to be a few teams, I would assume, outside of the range. So wouldn't they be the ones who say no? I mean, I don't know. But I will say this. It is getting sad that two things. One, and they're both about sounds. During Quali, I was looking down to type a tweet, and I wasn't paying attention to the TV, but all of a sudden I heard that sound, the Mercedes, and really Lewis's car sound. I knew when they cut to Lewis because you could hear the as it kept hitting the ground. And I said, that's got to be Lewis. And I looked up, it was Lewis. And you know what's funny? It was a different sound than I expected it to be. It might be the end of the chances to play
I've got to pull you up on this, because apparently now we have a new thing this week. So Now Mercedes are saying, well, it's not actually just porpoising; it's bouncing. We have bouncing as well. I'm like, what? I thought porpoising was the fancy name for bouncing, but apparently. And I think this is all them trying to angle for a return to active suspension, is that because these cars run so stiff to keep the car so low to make the ground effect better, not only do they experience the porpoising down the straights, but as soon as they hit any type of curb, the car basically launches into space, and when it comes back down again, it comes down like an anvil. So they're saying that Lewis was basically saying that as he hits a curb, and especially in Canada where you're really trying to ride the curbs a lot, as the car plants back down again, it's like it suddenly grips again, but it grips in a random direction that you're not 100% sure which direction it's going to be going in. So then you have to wrestle with it to kind of get it straight again. I'm like, okay, so you're double screwed right now then. You've got porpoising on the straights and you've got bouncing on the corners.
Well, the only good question that Danica Patrick asked anyone this weekend was to Toto about the ride height, and he did agree. He did acknowledge they'd changed the ride height a little bit for this weekend. So a lot more to come. A lot more to come on the bouncing, porpoising, and all things like that. Aussie, oi, oi, oi. The Australian GP renewed until 2035. 2035. That is far. I mean, 2035. Fernando will be on his 9th team by then, I think.
I thought it was a typo. I thought it was 2025.
So did I.
Okay.
2035. F1 may not exist. We may be at F0. I mean, like, cars could be off the ground, no tires. I mean, like, 2035.
Oh, no tires. I mean, what will you do?
I'll adapt. Couple notes around some of the social stuff we talked about already, liked by Pierre Gasly. I won't beat that dead horse. But there were like 5 or 6 videos that dropped this week that were pretty good and noteworthy. First, a quick one. F1 had the driver's view from inside the car. Oscar Piastri, who's all in the news for what may or may not come from his ride soon or not soon. It does sound like it's Williams, and it does sound like it's soon, but we'll see. Anyway, he was kind of showing what it's like to sit in the cockpit of a car. It was good, a little dry, but it was fun to kind of experience what that's like from their view. And then my favorite, I got into this AlphaTauri situation with Yuki and Pierre. I couldn't get enough of it. If you saw our tweet yesterday, Pukey, #Pukey, that's the new Carlando. It's the new F1 bromance. It's official. Dirty Side has called it, #Pukey. Small talk. It was pretty funny. And those guys just seemed to get along swimmingly, and both of them seemed to enjoy each other's company, and their families were hanging out in Montreal. It was cool. And speaking of Pukey, they were in the F1 Quick Draw Challenge on the F1 channel. It was great. So it was Alpine, AlphaTauri, and Haas. And all of them seemed to be having fun with this. You had to draw things. It was like a Pictionary type deal. But the draw your team principle was fantastic. And when they got to Haas, I couldn't get enough of it. I think I rewound it. I don't know. Rob, I know you saw that one. What did you think of that video?
By the way, I'm loving the fact that you're referencing that you rewound it. Good old VHS days, right? So...
Well, you got to actually pause it, and then because I'm watching it on a TV, so it is still the rewind button, even though it's YouTube.
Is it rewind, really? Okay, anyway.
Well, I can't put my finger on the TV and slide it back. I don't have that kind of money. But yeah.
But it was great, because you'd already seen it, and I hadn't, and I said, is it worth watching? I saw it pop up in my YouTube feed, and you're like, yeah, it's pretty good, but you're going to love it when they get through to the team principal drawing. And they just basically... The artwork, actually, that went into drawing the flipping of the bird was... It was awesome. You knew exactly what it was.
You did. Although I think, now I may have to go back and rewind it again. Did they give him 6 fingers or 5? I don't know. Antonio Fonseca pitched for the Cubs at 6 fingers. It's the weirdest thing I've ever heard of. If any of our listeners have 6 fingers, give us a buzz. We'd like to talk to you. WTF1 had a great video, not to give our competition a shout out, but they're the big bad boy in the room and they do some great stuff. They had Seb on and some really good questions from fans and from WTF1. Matt did a great job there. Fun video if you want to check it out. And then closing with a couple Red Bulls. So I mentioned this before Miami, right? We had Max and Yuki in a swamp buggy race. And this week we had Checo and Yuki racing Zambonis. They also had some Canadian guy who I don't know named Seb Toots. His name is Seb Toots. That cannot be your name. You cannot go out into the world, into Starbucks, and ask for a coffee for Seb Toots. But he's apparently a gold medalist or something. So big on you, Seb Toots. But it was fun to watch, Checo and Yuki race these Zambonis, and Checo won, and they gave him a frozen ice trophy, and he tossed it off to the side. And
how fast does a Zamboni? I mean, I'm
7 miles an hour.
I was going to say I've got visions of that Austin Powers scene where he's running the bad guy over in the steamroller, and it's like from about 50 yards away. He's like, "No!" He's like, "No, get out of the way, get out of the way!" And it's just in slow motion. I mean,
that's what it was. You had to be very accurate. Yuki made one mistake. He overcooked the first turn, and it was over from there. But anyway, if you got a couple minutes, check it out. The last one was Max and Checo in a true Red Bull, True or False About Canada. It was all right. They had a little fun. But if you want to know about facts about Canada, just wait for Pit Lane Paul's report today. My little segue teaser reminder. 3 whoppers of facts from Pit Lane Paul about Canada coming up just after our race review.
Speaking of which, our race review, this is a bit of a strange one. We'll start with practice, because looking back with it with hindsight now, although as I wrote these notes at the time, free practice 1 and 2 were could only be geared towards a race as long as it was dry.
Right.
Because everyone knew it was going to rain the next day. So we knew that basically FP3 and quali was probably going to be wet. So you kind of had this kind of, I don't know, FP1 and 2 just didn't really seem to matter. It was just more kind of guys acclimatizing themselves to the track, really. So we'll just kind of scoot over that one, really. We'll Seb Toots over it. But FP3, wow, Alpine and Aston brought it to the party, man. I mean, and this is the moment. This whole little microcosm of Alpine looking super strong, Aston right up at the front as well. This had me reaching, and then I think the news breaking here around Charles as well for the penalties.
10-20, he was starting at the back. They announced it then, and Seb looked like a world
on
fire, and Fernando was amazing. And we're thinking, like you said, can't wait to see quali. Look at the Alpines, look at the Aston Martins, and they were good in the wet all day.
Yeah, FP3. I mean, they were absolutely bossing it, and it was like, this has got all the ingredients to be an absolute barnstormer, because we're not going to have Leclerc up front doing any action, but hey, maybe one of the other guys can come in and get their elbows out and give Max something to think about. So we roll through to quali, and I'm thinking, okay, well, we're going to see the old guard here. We're going to see Alonso and Seb up at the front. This is going to be epic. And Alonso was, but Aston just seemed to, I don't know, did they leave a wheel off the car? What happened to
They took those 2 hours between FP3 and Q1. They took those 2 hours to make the car considerably worse. I don't know what they did. It was the same
slow button
environment. Wrong. Yeah, exactly. They brought the Ferrari slow button over and they put 5 of them on the car. What happened? Both Astons went out. They looked terrible. And Lance is not the best driver on the grid, but he's not a bad driver. And he's better in the wet. We've seen it over his entire career. He had a pole in the wet. He's better in the wet. He was horrible. Seb went from hero to zero in Q1. Both Alpha Tauris were out. And Nicky Latifi was out, so both Canadians washed out in Q1, in a wet Q1. I was confused by Pierre. Pierre had another bad weekend after a good weekend. I don't understand what happened to Pierre.
No, I don't, and I'm particularly upset because off the back end of FP3, I binned Leclerc in my fantasy team to free up his budget, because there's no point, because I think you gave me the little insight that if he qualifies in X position but takes all those penalties to go to the back, none of those overtakes to get up to where he was count. So
his max points was like 20, and he got it, basically, but he could never get above that.
Yeah, so I'm like, right, you're out of here, Charles, this week. So kind of cashed in that. I'm like, wow, now I've got I'm swimming in cash now. Who do I spend it on? Hey, Alonso, come on board. Hey, Gasly, come on board. I'm like, yeah, thanks, Gasly.
Yeah. Well, and then Q2, we saw a lot of big names go out. We saw, what was fascinating to me was we had Lando, Alex, Charles, Sergio, and Valtteri out in Q2. Both Haas's advanced. And at this point, the Haas thing had me really jazzed up, that Mick made it through. He didn't need Lando to swap a place with him for a lap that was taken off the board. And we had Lando out, we had Alex out. Probably the most interesting picture of the weekend was when Checo went out. and got his nose stuck under the thing there, and he walked back
through the rainforest.
Exactly. He was dining at the Rainforest Cafe. And then they actually made the point. He's like, if he goes off to the right a little bit, it's like a 10-foot down embankment, and then you're in the St. Lawrence Seaway.
There was a great meme that did the rounds, which was someone photoshopped him over. I think it's either Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, where it's him running off into the distance, going, "I'm going on an adventure." They put Checo on, heading off into the woods.
Oh, it was a bad weekend for Checo too. We'll get to that during the race.
Yeah, thanks, Turbo Driver Checo.
Yeah, I mean, I love Checo, man. I got hosed turbo driving him this week. And then Q3, as we talk about, it was fun to kind of get the bankers in. You get an early one in, see what happens. And then I thought it was fascinating. Why don't you talk about it, what George did? Because I was sitting here, I basically was yelling. I'm like, this is either going to be great or terrible.
Yeah, I mean, people were like ridiculing Mercedes for trying this. I'm like, well, why not? Everyone's done that banker on the intermediates, and we've kind of got the layout of the top 10 now. So why not try something? So George comes out bravely on the slicks, and I'm like, okay, you need to kind of get around corner 1, because corner 1 is still a lake. Everything else is kind of looking fairly dry, so just get around that first couple of corners and you'll be all right. Yeah, he wasn't all right.
He wasn't. As I'm watching the TV, I felt like I was Alex Albon watching this. I was so hoping it was going to be a monster, and like you said, it was worth the risk. It was not a lot of downside.
No,
yes,
exactly.
you could have probably run an Inter at that point. It was drying out. Maybe you improve by a couple tenths of a second if you're lucky. Or you could get the slicks, and if you can get those, like you said, get them lit up and get around the lake at 1 and 2, you could go to pole.
Yeah, and I actually think that the speed he would have needed to take turn 1 at to tiptoe round and stay on the track, I don't think he'd have made that up on the rest of the lap then on slick. So I just think that they took a gamble, but corners 1 and 2 just were not dry enough to play into slicks. But, so what? But we got Max put it up on... Well, sorry, Max took provisional pole, and then Fernando was on an absolute blinder. And I've not been on the edge of my seat like this for a long time watching qualifying. And you kind of like, come on, Fernando, come on. And I was actually kind of disappointed when he only got second. And then I took a couple of breaths. I'm like, holy cow, Fernando Alonso in an Alpine is on second position. I mean, that's all. The disappointment of him not making pole kind of subsided, and that was such a stellar drive from him. It really was.
I was doing the Haas happy dance, 5th and 6th. I mean, that is insane. So let's not say Haas is an American team. Haas is a North American team, and they dominated quali in North America. And then the 1997 world champion, Canadian, and son of whom the track is named after, Jacques Villeneuve, did the interviews. And that was fun. It was great seeing Jacques out there asking those questions. I enjoyed him very much.
What I also enjoyed was Max's reaction to seeing Fernando alongside him when they got out the cars. And actually, and I know this is going to sound crazy because he's a world champion, but he was almost in a little bit like fanboying over the fact that he's got Fernando Alonso. And I think there was an interview with him later, and he's like, well, yeah, I grew up watching this guy race. He was the guy that I looked up to when I was still karting. And yeah, I'm alongside him. And there's a little... I'm surprised there's not a little sap stat in here, to be honest, Brian. You've let me down again here. But... that means Fernando has started alongside on the front row of the grid, I think, alongside both father and son.
Sap stat.
No, it's gone. It's gone. You missed it.
Retroactive edition.
No.
So then the race starts, right? And I figured out what I want. We all run around as F1 fans saying, oh, we want a wet race, or oh, we want, a jumbled grid, or oh, we want this, that, or the other. I figured out at least what I want. I like a wet qualifying and a dry race. I like the idea of the race itself. And you know what? If you want to give me some sprinkles in the race, I'm not going to complain. But I don't like the monsoon in the race. It's not like, I want to see actual racing where you get close to each other and you can do the overtakes. You can't do all that in the wet as easily. I love, though, starting a dry race with a jumbled grid. I love the fact that race pace, be damned, people are going to be overtaking, coming through, finding the right pace. Strategy is going to matter. I love all that. So for me, I think I learned that just yelling I like an occasional wet race, or like you would say, turn the sprinklers on every now and then. Turn it on during quali, but maybe leave them off during the race itself. Yeah. So I loved what ended up happening. And I realized it as they're starting the race today. as I'm sitting there watching this thinking, man, this is going to be good. And it was amazing. So thank you, Montreal.
It was.
Tremendous.
It was. And before we kind of pick over the bones of it, I'm just going to say, so I was back down the local pub again. I was back down the Iron Horse in Unionville. We had a nice crowd turnout there, and it was cool. I had to explain to people why, a couple of people that were new to it, as to why everything was so jumbled up. It's like, why aren't all the fast cars at the front? And I was like, like you just said, it's the joy of a wet qualification. But just before we get into the picking the bones out of the race, the thing that still hits me about doing this pod is that the guy that's kind of has been kind enough, Dober, to start putting all this F1 stuff on in the bar, he came up to me and he said, crazy story this week. He said a couple came in from California and they came into the bar and they asked me if this was the F1 bar in the area. And he was like, yeah, how did you know that? And they were like, well, we've moved here from California, and one of our friends back in California listens to this podcast, which called this pub out by name. I was like, oh my gosh, this is nuts. This is absolutely nuts. But anyway, whoever you are in California, thank you very much. More than welcome to fly over here and join us in the bar. That would be great. So we all sat round, and we all were there watching for the start. And we all wanted the one thing that didn't happen, unfortunately. We all wanted Alonso to get off to an absolute flyer, get the elbows out on Max. I didn't want Max to crash, but you know what? I wouldn't have minded if Alonso could have thrown one up the inside and kind of led to Max tangling with someone behind, maybe a little spin, sending him back 10 places, maybe back with Charles even, and some kind of like mammoth re-overtake situation would have been amazing.
Or Fernando just pips him at the corner, and now Fernando's running his DRS train from the front, from the actual engine of the train, as opposed to midway through. And we've seen what he can do. He is, by far, bar none, the defensive driving specialist in F1. And if you get Max behind him, how frustrated would Max's radio have been while it still worked? How frustrated would Max have been? Mate, he's all over the track, mate. I can't get by him. And he was all over the track, and he did pay for that later with the weaving, but we'll get to that at the end. But it was awesome. It was probably not the start we wanted, but I'll say this. I was sure Max was going to drive off into the sunset. I was sure of it. I would have bet $20 on it, as I've lost every time on all my bets, that Max would have just taken off and won by 50 seconds and had no challengers. Thank God I was wrong. It was a much better race than that.
Oh, it was an awesome race. I think the only reason it was, though, I think Max was heading off into the distance, but we'll come to it as we go through the race later. I think it was kind of circumstance that pulled everyone back into it, but safety cars, etc. But
it's circumstance I convinced a beautiful woman like my wife to marry me, but it still counts.
Anyhow, so we've kind of going through the first few laps of the race. Like Brian said, everyone was kind of, the people that were out of position were all kind of pushing for places. Mick lost a couple of places, and I was kind of thinking, well, okay, but then he kind of settled into 7th. I'm thinking, this is the day that Mick's going to get his points.
Wrong.
I know. We'll get there, Brian. And then we had what probably ruined K-Mag's race was getting a little racy with Lewis right at the beginning. They came together, and somehow, normally, whenever we see a front wing brush against a rear tyre like that, it's usually the rear tyre that comes off worse and we get a puncture. Yeah,
how is there no puncture?
I don't know. So somehow Lewis's kind of like Kevlar-coated tyres just disintegrate K-Mag's front wing, but apparently take no damage themselves.
Maybe that's why they're porpoising. They've been putting like Flex Seal tape all around the outside of the tires so that they don't get any punctures. Man, I felt... And then... At the end of the race, Esteban actually joked with Kevin that he went on the team radio and complained about the front wing flapping to try to get him a black and whatever color flag that he has to pit, and it worked.
Yeah.
So I'm sure F1 and the FIA didn't listen to Esteban necessarily, but it doesn't help when other drivers are complaining about it. And Esteban joked he thought he was all right, but he complained about it on the radio to try to get attention to it to get him pulled into the pits, and he did. And so what was killer to me is to watch Kevin go in and pit. It was just, I was excited to see what was going to happen, but a black and orange flag, I think, for Kevin. Lewis, you screwed my team. And then like a lap later, Checo retires, pulls off to the side, no drive, and now my turbo driver has retired. Sorry, and Kevin is 20th or 19th now. So K-Mag in the Haas 19th. Checo retired. My fantasy team is in shambles on like lap 7. And I was bummed. But you know what? The race kept delivering.
Yeah, it did. But I mean, and then the other kicker there for K-Mag is that it was like 1 or 2 laps in it. So he takes a full-on hit of a full pit stop to go and change his front wing. Then Checo goes out and brings the virtual safety car out, of which point loads of teams just decide to go in and take the reduced. So K-Mag got screwed twice there. Once with the pit that he didn't want to take. Secondly, it kind of cost him the full stop, whereas if Checo had retired like a lap or 2 earlier, he could have maybe got himself back in again because he would have had a cheaper pit stop. But
well, the interesting thing as well is he was the last finisher, K-Mag. So it felt like, and I'm not saying he didn't give it his all, I know he did, but maybe the Haas's aren't good at overtaking. I don't know what, but whenever they get pushed towards the back, they don't make up a lot of ground. So he just sat there at the back for the rest of the race, and he occasionally moved up the board a little bit, but usually because of other people pitting. So I don't know. It was fascinating. And then the pit stops start happening. By about lap 15, we're seeing different cars come in and out. Ferrari kind of going opposite to Red Bull. It was still kind of jumbled up. It was fun to watch. We'd had Carlos in first now, Max second after he'd pitted, Fernando, who was trying to pull an Albon and just go forever without pitting, George, and then Hamilton, who had pitted. And then we saw Leclerc, what began sort of a common theme towards the back middle back of the group, a lot of DRS trains. And there was one at this point with Leclerc stuck in 12th in an Albon DRS train with Alex, Valtteri, Charles, and Lando. And then Stroll even rolled up onto the scene and said, let me get in on this action. And so we had a massive DRS train rolling back there, and it was kind of fun to watch. And actually what was fascinating to me is the announcers were actually saying once Valtteri gets past Alex, they bet Charles will be able to as well. Not only were they right, it happened on the next turn. That was wild to me. Valtteri finally gets past Alex, and then Charles does it on literally the next corner. So they kind of finally got out of that train, but it was many laps of them all just attempting to get around each other and couldn't.
Yeah, and what I can't quite get my head around is that something's wrong with the back end of that Ferrari, and they mentioned it on the commentary. The back end, they were losing time in the corners this week, where all season they've been stable through the corners, and they've had the straight line speed has been their problem. And then this week, whatever the hell they've done, they've flipped it all around, because I was thinking, we'll talk about it when we get towards the end of the race with Sainz, but Leclerc in this DRS train, okay, fine, everyone's got DRS. So what? So that means that everyone's equal. Right. So therefore the fastest car, probably ergo the Ferrari, should be the one that's going to slice through all this, right?
He couldn't pass anybody in these things.
He could get close. He'd get up to the hairpin, and then literally look like he stuck it in reverse as he went round the hairpin, because everyone else has got superior drive coming out of that hairpin, and that Ferrari just was terrible exiting that hairpin. It had no rear grip whatsoever as it came off that hairpin. It was insane.
We saw a lot of passes with DRS on that long straight coming out of the hairpin, but we never really saw the Ferraris make that happen for themselves. And as I'm watching, I'm Antonio Giovinazzi over here getting ready for the hairpin every single time. Hairpin. And then yet nothing happened. I mean, I'm literally hairpin, and then nothing from the Ferraris on those straights. And as we say, we'll get to it at the end, but Carlos did his darndest. He did a great drive. I actually got very nervous. We'll talk about this in a couple minutes here. He had a great drive, but he just could never put it together coming out of the hairpin to make a move on Max. He got up on his gearbox. Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself. All right.
I was going to say, let's save it, because I'm not 100% sure I agree with you on the great drive. So let's save the fisticuffs until the end. So then we had the heartbreak, which was Mick, which was like, oh my gosh, this guy can't catch a break. He's now legitimately, okay, he lost a couple of places, but he was 7th.
He was in the
holding
points.
His own. He was in the points, well in the points.
Yes,
he wasn't getting caught.
Totally.
He was, he was getting caught. He had one car right behind him that was pressurizing him, but he was dealing with it. And then all of a sudden he got overtaken. I was like, okay, maybe he's pushed it too wide doing the defense. It's like, no, he hasn't pushed it too wide. He's slowing down because the Haas has let go. I'm like, oh, man.
I mean, how many races in a row is it where Haas had DNFs? It feels like since Monaco, every single race, maybe even before, it was double at Monaco. Well, it was an accident for Mick, but Kevin had the DNF. And so it's just, I really, and I'm not just saying this because Mick's also on my fantasy team. So at this point, I got Mick, Checo, and K-Mag at the back. And I'm like, I'm thinking, you know what? If I light fire to the fantasy servers, will anyone know what actually happened to me at this point? I didn't know what to do.
Oh, I know. And then we had a little bit of action over at McLaren where Lando came in, and I think they're still trying to change his tyres now.
Well, they were double stacking, which has to be perfect to start with. And Danny Rick was first, and that one took too long, and Lando's waiting for his turn at the pumps, and then they bring him through, and then it's like you said, I think they're still getting the tire changed. It was a disaster of a pit stop.
I don't know what you think, but I felt like McLaren today fell into the hole that George Russell has been in for the last 8 years. I don't really remember seeing them being talked about at all, other than the terrible pit stops.
Nope.
I can't really remember ever seeing a McLaren out on track. Were
they
there
finished
today?
11th and 15th. I mean, they had a terrible day. Pit stops included. They had a terrible day. No, we didn't see them. They were in the George Russell witness protection plan. But George had a good day, and we'll get to that a little bit more in a second. And then, like I said, up until lap 25 I thought was really action-packed. And then we kind of went into a very brief lull where it was just Chuck trying to pass Esteban for a while. And like you said, the rear of the Ferrari, he just couldn't do it. And Esteban, I don't think of as, I know it's an Alpine, and I know they love to run a DRS train around town every now and then. But I didn't think he was defending particularly strongly, and he's not known for that. Charles just couldn't get grip out of the corner and get a move on him. And it was painful to watch for lap after lap after lap. And then we had DRS train number 2 in the back of the midfield with Stroll, Zhou Guanyu, Yuki Tsunoda, and Daniel Ricciardo in a row, just kind of hanging around. And the train wasn't doing anything, and Charles couldn't get by Esteban. And I wrote, from basically like lap 25 to 38, it was a little bit of a lull, and that's okay. And then we had the safety car.
What even happened there? How does he? I was sat in the bar, and I only briefly caught the replay. I didn't see it happening, but what the heck happened with that safety car? How did he bin it like that?
I don't know. Well, the one that confused me the most was on lap 49, which was Yuki, right? Is that the one?
Okay. Is that okay? Yeah. Sorry. So I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm scrolling ahead on the notes here, and I'm getting all excited. But yeah. Okay. So we get the first safety car, right?
Right. And then what was confusing to me was it a VSC, I think? And then what was confusing to me is at this point the announcers actually started predicting the Mercedes race at the end. They're like, well, they're on different strategies, but we're going to have George and Lewis at each other right at the end. I was actually really hoping that would happen. It did not quite come to fruition in that way. They kind of couldn't quite catch each other, but it was fun to kind of watch this race come together. And then another slow pit stop. When you know where you're in the lull, here, let me say this. You know you're in the lull when on lap 42, they go back to lap 39 to show a slow pit stop for the man really far in the back, Nicky Latifi. He was so far in the back, and there was no action going on for a very brief period of time. This is a banger of a race, but for like 10 laps or so, they go back and they show Nicky Latifi, and then things start actually happening. People start pitting. Charles had a bad pit stop, put him out at the end of that DRS train I mentioned. It was just a bummer, and that's when Yuki had the crazy. Yeah, what happened? I don't.
Now we can go back and pretend that I didn't already say this like 2 minutes.
Did he hit a bump? Did he hit? They say he hit a bump. I don't understand.
It just kind of looked like he just binned it. They showed the replay, and I was like, "What have you done?" I mean, if there was a bump, there was a bump. Maybe there was a bump that no one else got when they came out of the pits, but literally came straight out of the pits and binned it. I mean, I don't think there was a shorter walk back to the pit lane that you can make on the circuit, other than if you spin it.
He still grabbed a ride on the scooter for a little bit of it. But can I say this? You know who I feel bad for?
Who?
Those tires. They if you're a tire and your goal in life, in your existence, is to be a Formula One tire. You're the best tire in the world, and you end up on a car, and everyone's like me is talking about you if you're the C1 or the C2 or this, and so they put you on your car, and you're like, all right, I'm powering an Alpha Tauri, and you go out there for about 5 feet and then crash into a wall. I'd be so pissed if I were those tires. Like my whole life, I waited for this 5 feet. I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine back at like the tire bar later. Then you'll have all the burnt out tires that were almost near puncture. They're all kind of going, "Hey, how'd you get on today?" "Oh, that's okay. I had a little grain and a bit of blistering." and these guys are kind of sitting over the back, kind of slurping some kind of like, I don't know. They're not even having a beer because they're not even allowed beer. They got water. They
didn't even break a sweat.
Yeah,
and they're never to be used again. That was my whole life. Anyway,
oh my gosh, where were we?
So that caused the safety car that really jumbled things up, brought Carlos right onto the gearbox of Max, and at this point, Rob and I were sending notes to each other, and I said, "Do you think Carlos can overtake Max?" I said, "I don't know if anyone does," and you said, "Maybe."
I said, "Maybe, believe."
Yeah, I said, I want to. Trust me, I do. I just don't. And so this is where we can talk about the rest of it as we go, but can we take a minute here just to focus on Carlos and the next 15 laps on Max? So we'll hit the rest, I promise. But to me, this was an indictment of the rest of the field or a validation of how great Max is. There are two good cars. Red Bulls and Ferraris. There are 4 drivers of those cars. Max and Checo, Charles and Carlos. And you had a guy in Carlos on slightly newer tires. It wasn't a huge difference, but it was a difference. Right behind Max at the restart, 15 laps to go. You'll have DRS for 12 of those laps or 13 of those laps. You have newer tires. You've got everything to fight for. You have no one really behind you. And I'm not knocking Lewis, but we knew Lewis wasn't going to pass him. And so the question then becomes, can Carlos make it happen? And I actually thought, again, Max would drive off into the sunset. And to me, it was a validation of how good Max is and how good his car is. I think there's only one person on this grid who can take it to Max right now, and it's Charles. And bad strategy and bad power units and lack of reliability have cost us seeing that, at least recently. We saw it in the beginning of the year. And Carlos and Checo, and I know everyone wants to say, and I love Checo, say, oh, he's fighting for the world championship. He hasn't had the pace the last couple races. It just feels to me like there are 2 drivers of the 2 top teams who are clearly number 1 in each team who can take it to each other, and that's it. And It's Max and it's Charles. And until Charles gets his reliability together and his strategy together, Max is going to walk away with the championship. And I'm not saying it's going to be a blowout because Ferrari will get their act together a little bit, but I don't see it being close.
No, I mean, I think Charles would have had Max if he was in that situation. And the reason I say this is because Sainz couldn't get his optimal lap hooked up, despite the fact that he had 15 attempts to do so. And what I mean by that is the first few sections through the corners, as they came down the pit lanes, they went over the start-finish line, and with those DRS sections, he would usually be about 0.5 as they went across the start-finish line. They'd go through the first few sectors, and Sainz would give up like 0.4 of a second. It'd be 0.9, and he'd stay in DRS, but he'd be hovering at the 0.9. 0.9, 0.9, 0.9. He'd get to the hairpin, 0.7. He'd come off the hairpin with terrible traction. It'd be 0.9. DRS would fly wide open. He'd get all the way back down to 0.6 again. Through the
even a little closer, maybe.
Yeah. Through the wall. No, 0.6, because believe me, I was watching this and marking this down. Through the wall of champions, second DRS, get back down to that 0.5, 0.4 maybe sometimes, and we'll do the dance again. And then what he managed to show was on 2 laps, he managed to stay with not surrender it and get back to 0.9 in the first few sections. He managed to stay in 0.6, and I'm like, oh, here we go. If you can keep that 0.6, we know you're going to get the DRS up the straight. This is the one. This is the one. No, I'm going to screw up my entry to the hairpin and give it all back again. So there was pace in that Ferrari to make that pass. He just couldn't seem to dial in the 2 laps that he needed where he got all those sections right. And I think that is exactly what you're saying, that I think if Charles is sitting in that seat right behind Max, he can dial those laps in. He does. Does he pass Max? I don't know, but he at least has a run up the inside of him going into the Wall of Champions.
He puts his nose next to him at some point.
Exactly. And Sainz never did. He took a couple of optimistic wiggles out on the straight, but Max isn't really caring at that point.
Oh, Max didn't weave at all. He didn't try to break the toe or anything. He knew he had it.
Exactly. So it was great to see Ferrari back up at the front. It was great to see the Ferrari not fail and blow up, but just wish it was the two Ferraris the other way around, because I think we would have had an even greater finish. I mean, it was great. Don't get me wrong. Watching those last 15 laps, because you wanted Sainz to do it, or you wanted at least close, and then it kind of validated everything that these new cars have been about, the closeness. Sainz didn't have to back off for 5 laps and let everything cool down and then have another
he was on
attack.
him the whole time.
It was just 12 laps of DRS.
Amazing. It was so great. I totally agree with you. Everyone was following closely throughout the whole race. There were times, except for that lull, when there were many, many cars in DRS of the car in front of them. And there were overtakes, and it was fun to watch. But it feels to me like at this point, Max is like, it's Rocky IV and he's Drago. And there's no way anyone can beat him unless the little feisty underdog, Rocky Balboa, Charles Leclerc, can kind of get his act together and get the team's act together and remind everyone to put some oil in the engine next time so it doesn't blow up and give him a shot. And I love Carlos. So this is my point. I actually don't think Carlos could have done much more. I don't think there are any other drivers on the grid, bar maybe Charles or Lewis, who can take something like that to Max with a good enough car. And so I'm not knocking Carlos at all. I was worried it was going to go the other way. When it started, I was actually worried he'd fall back pretty fast, and then maybe Lewis would come up on him and try to take his lunch, or he'd make a mistake because he was pushing too hard and end up off in, was there gravel for him to find? I don't know. He loves the gravel. I don't know if there was gravel available for him to find, but it was, I give Carlos a lot of credit. I mean, just because he's not better than the best in the world, that's okay in my mind.
He was in a better position though. Like you said, newer tires,
like 10 laps
down.
10 laps over him. It wasn't like Abu Dhabi last year where one's on worn out hards and someone's on brand new softs.
But he proved over about 5 or 6 laps that he could nail a section at a time. He just couldn't put 3 sections together, and that is what's going to keep Carlos Sainz back from ever challenging for a world title.
Well, we'll talk about challenging. Yes, we'll talk about his wins in a second.
Yeah, I know he's got no wins, but right now he's sitting, and like you say, Ferrari and Red Bull are head and shoulders above the rest. As long as they don't blow up, those cars are going to be at the front, and they're going to be taking the podiums.
Right.
I mean, Charles did a phenomenal job driving back to, where did he finish? Was it fifth? Yeah. Yep. So I mean, great job cutting
with
through.
a car, like you said, that had no grip coming out of the corners. I mean, he did that through. I mean, I feel like it was one of those things when he finished the race, he was probably exhausted because that was work. That was not like him like Lewis in Brazil last year when he took the new engine and he started in the back and just dominated through the sprint and then through the race and won. That was the opposite of this. Like he was grinding it out.
Agree.
It was amazing to watch. And then we did have the Alpine Alpha Tauri battle going on at this time. The only other thing to really mention. And at this point, I'd like to eat a full plate of crow, if that's okay, because we big upped Otmar for like 3 weeks in a row for letting the Alpines race. And then we get down to it, and we've got Valtteri right on Fernando's bumper, and you got Joe right behind Valtteri, and it just looks like sorry, I said Alpha Tauri for Alfa Romeos. The Alfa Romeos are coming through, and then they get on the radio to Fernando, who's the trailing Alpine, and they say, just hold position and don't let anyone pass you. Like, wait, what? You're basically putting on like the shields on a battle carrier and just holding them in the back to stop Valtteri from coming by. I'm like, no, don't do that. The Alfa Romeos were looking feisty. Double points finish, really exciting for them. And Valtteri almost had Fernando at the end. We'll talk about the penalty in a second here, but Valtteri almost had Fernando, and I agree. If they'd allowed Fernando to pass Esteban, then I think both Alfa Romeos would have passed Esteban.
Yeah, I was thinking about this at the time. I know we were lauding them for the let them race, but I think this was actually one of those instances where you can understand why they did it.
Right. And it wasn't don't race each other. It was don't let them eat us up. It was like you're the guy who's going to be... But still, I would have rather seen Otmar get on there and be like, oh, just rubbing his race and go for it. And that was not what was said over the radio. So I'll give Otmar a little bit of a pass, and we know why. We know why they did it. And then Fernando, who loves to weave back and forth. If anyone remembers last year at the sprint race at Silverstone, which we're going to next, but last year in the sprint race, he was really weaving left and right. So much I thought he should have gotten a penalty then. He was doing that through the last couple laps to hold Valtteri back, and he ended up getting a 5-second penalty and dropping behind both Alfa Romeos. So he finished 7th, but then moved back to ninth because of that. So it was fun to watch, and we have some stats here. But Rob, anything else before we kind of close out the race with some stats?
No. Looking forward to the SAP stats.
As you should, and here they come right now. SAP Stats Canadian GP edition. All right, so we talked about Carlos, and it's his 5th time finishing 2nd, which actually Rob and I were talking about a little bit. Still no wins, but great to see him, at least I think, great to see him racing like this. However, just some information, after his 2nd place, he now has 11 Formula One podiums without a victory. That's just 2 short of Nick Heidfeld's record, who himself finished 2nd in 2 consecutive Canadian Grands Prix in 07 and 08. Red Bull now has 82 F1 wins, passing Lotus for 5th on the all-time list. I thought was pretty interesting. My man, Witness Protection George, who still didn't get a lot of press even though he finished 4th, maintains his record of finishing. He's the only driver to score points in every race in 2022, and he's doing it, as we've said, in consistent fashion, always in the top 5, which is friggin' amazing. I added my fantasy team. We're almost to the fantasy section here because of his consistency. Esteban was P6, tied Alpine's best result of the year. He was also 6th in Saudi in the 2nd race of the season. And then Alfa Romeo, Valtteri took P7 for his 7th points finish in 9 Grands Prix this year, which is really amazing. So it's a deal from a fantasy perspective. He also got points at the sprint at Imola, so extra points on top of that. But someone who I actually think has impressed a lot this year is Zhou Guanyu. He's had a lot of technical failures, DNFs and car challenges over his time there. It was his best career finish in 8th. Remember, he crossed the line in 9th, but moved up when Fernando dropped back, so 8th place. And it's his first points since Bahrain. But I don't feel like Zhou Guanyu is a pushover. I feel like he's a guy out there who sets pace, who can overtake, who's always hungry and looking for the moves, and his moves seem pretty good. And I know at the beginning of the year there was a lot of talk about him being, a paid driver and bringing in the Chinese market. I disagree 100%. I love what I see from Zhou at this point, and I think he's doing a great job. And I would love to see, a reliability increase in his Alfa Romeo, allowing him to have a good day of quali and then get into the race. I think he can keep in the points with this car. Yeah, no, I agree. I was listening to our friend. I'm going to call him our friend Nate, on the Pad Hoc F1 podcast that they do with a couple of ESPN's Nate Saunders. That's right. Yeah, who has appeared on the Pokey Little Dirty Side podcast. Yeah, yes. And he does a podcast with a couple of other F1 journalists, and they were talking about the budget cap, and they were saying, do you know where we are right now? Everyone's thinking that it's done and dusted, that Max is going to win it, but no one can prove it right now because no one really gives out all the details, but it looks like Red Bull have probably burnt through a lot of their upgrades, which is why Christian Horner's making a lot of crybaby noises around not being able to turn up for the last few races because they'll be out of money, right? Yeah. So, and have Ferrari actually spent all their budget, and actually have all the teams really brought all of their upgrades right now. There's some feisty-looking cars, the Haas and the Alfa keep looking and keep threatening to be feisty, and if they've still got a little bit up their sleeves in terms of upgrades, we could be really looking at kind of quite an amazing end to the season as kind of some of these cars bring all of these teams, bring all of their upgrades to the table. It's a bit of an unknown to know where everybody is right now. Although, like I say, there's that commonly held feeling that Red Bull have basically, they're just done. We're going big, we're going early, we're going to get points on the table, and then it's down to everyone else to chase us. So that's just something for everyone to bear in mind, that if you think, there's no point watching the rest of the season because Max has got this in the bag, I wouldn't be so sure. Well, he is the best driver in one of the best cars, but what do we know? We're just Rob and Brian. Why don't we hear a little bit from the always amazing Pit Lane Paul and see if you can catch the amazing Canadian facts in his report.
Hey guys, that's Canada done. Yeah, it was good, wasn't it? Actually, it's good to have quite an exciting race. It was made pretty exciting. Obviously, the weather yesterday, Saturday, was pretty bad here, and then even on Thursday, we had like a pretty severe tornado warning as well hit the circuit, which is quite mad. But yeah, nothing really materialised. It just got really, really wet, and when I say wet, the pit lane was flooded, garages were flooded, it was torrential rain. It's a long time since I've seen rain like that. It did make us stay in the bar the one night, in which, we only had a few beers, but it did come for about $140 worth of alcohol. I'm not proud of that one. Don't drink, it's the most sensible thing. But on to more sensible things. There's a review of Canada. It's actually got the largest coast in the world, largest coastline. Who knew that? And amazingly, there was a war here called the Beaver Wars. Now, if you're slightly childish like me, I'm not going to go any further with that. Let's talk about the race. Actually, really, really exciting. So, it started off, it was going to be exciting with Alonso into that first corner. It was always going to be a bit magical. It's brilliant that, the guy that age still shows his class. So, that was cool. Moving onwards from that, there was a bit going on, a bit of chopping and changing. Leclerc was trying to fight his way through, but kept getting caught in a DRS train. I don't know if there's a fix for that. It seemed to happen quite a lot where the cars were just stuck. Guan Yu Zhou also had the issue with being stuck behind Stroll. And there were some good tyre strategies. Actually, the fact that the grid was so mixed up after a wet qualifying, it made it really exciting. Sad for Perez, obviously, and issues for him, and then little Mick again, he just can't seem to cut any sort of luck, can he? It just goes bad for him. And then Yuki Tsunoda with I don't know, I can't explain what happened with Tsunoda coming out of the pits. The only thing I could say was cold tyres, but it was such a bizarre incident. Luckily, it actually made the end of the race more exciting. So it Sainz, he tried everything on Max. Max is too quick, and that's the thing. The Ferrari, both of them, they seemed to lack traction on the rear end as they were coming out of corners, which was really weird. You could see it when they were doing the overhead shots. They were snaking around, and I think ultimately that's what cost them the victory there. And probably even with Leclerc, he should have been a lot further forward. But had the same issue. He just couldn't seem to get traction out the corner, especially the hairpin, to then close up to the back of the cars in front. And I don't know. It was quite. It was just one of those races, but very good. We sort of finished. Verstappen deserved winner. He was a quicker weekend. He can't knock it. Sainz brilliant, second place. Big shout to Lewis Hamilton in third. That, needless to say, is pretty. Again, they keep picking up points, Mercedes, don't they? They got this really bad car, they got this, that and the other, but they keep picking up points. And where Ferrari and, Red Bull have their failures and they have their issues, Mercedes is sort of just consistently picking up points. I don't think they're going to be in a position to win races this year, but, don't write them off for the Constructors' Championship. I know that sounds mad, but it's a long season if you have two cars finishing, and that's great. For us, it's with Valtteri in Zhou, it's brilliant to see both cars finally finishing in the points. That was excellent. We probably could have got the Alpines at the end, but they did a great job. They protected Ocon. I think they were sitting ducks if Alonso would have gone past. So, as much as we don't like team orders, it was the right thing for them to do. They've pretty much benefited because they've got themselves a nice 6th and 7th place finish. So. And that's it. I fly back to the UK tonight. Canada's apparently got less gravity than anywhere else in the world. That's my third bizarre fact for you about Canada. So, providing the plane can actually get off the floor, which if there's no gravity, you'd think that should be easy, then I will see you in a few weeks in the home of motorsport, and that is the United Kingdom. Good day.
Amazing update from Pit Lane Paul. But I would like to know more about the Beaver War. I have to assume that there were no Brazilians involved. Well, some people will pick up on that. I'll leave that one alone. But man.
Do you know what? So listening to that, we're nodding along going, my gosh, we're not just two bozos that know nothing about F1, because all the points that we've been making about lack of grip and Alpine team orders, everything that Paul, as the expert in the pit lane, is saying. Me and you were on the same wavelength as him. And then he starts talking about gravity and trying to take off in a plane. And I'm like, oh, maybe we don't want to be on the same page as him.
No. I think we've got it rocking here, these two bozos. And I think it would be, we'd be remiss if we didn't highlight that this is America's leading Formula One podcast. Go tell your friends. Speaking of people who listen.
Okay, this week, tired of having to put up with an endless barrage of fake Brian friends who he just endlessly pays off to turn up on 100 Seconds of DRS, we have a good buddy of mine, goes back many years. Welcome to 100 Seconds of DRS, Az.
Hello.
Nice to meet you, Az. I can't believe Rob has any friends, so this is a shocker to me. I'm just thrilled to meet you.
Yeah, and I hate to admit it, I had to pay him to be my friend initially, so that's really
That was the smallest fee ever paid to anybody, I'm assuming. Welcome to the podcast. So we were talking a little bit about this before, but kind of give us a little view of your F1 fandom. I'd love to kind of for people to hear how you got in and then your journey to where you are now in terms of appreciating F1.
Yeah, so like I said, it's not a linear process. I started following it in the 80s because I'm that old, in the days of Senna, Prost, Nigel Mansell. And I've always been a fan of motorsports, especially. And during the time, in Israel, you go to the army at the age of 18. So 1990 hit, I kind of got away from it. Back in the 90s, came back and I started watching actually more MotoGP with Mick Doohan and the others. And I was kind of dipping in and out. I was watching a lot of rally races with Carlos Sainz Sr. and some Finnish people, I can't pronounce their name, racing from Paris to Dakar. And I was kind of dipping out towards the 2000s in and out. And in the last, I think, 5 years, Nimrod, my son, started following Formula One and kind of started pulling me back, and I started watching more and more. And then I found out your podcast, weirdly, through my son. And it escalated from there. I really love the podcast and really pulled me in, I have to admit. I kind of enjoy watching Formula One, not least to pester Rob on WhatsApp in parallel, to try to break his concentration.
That's amazing. Can I ask a quick question before Rob continues on? So how much did he pay you to say those nice things about the podcast, Az?
No, not yet. I'm going to the States hopefully around October, so I'll expect a big squeeze in return.
Well, I was going to bring that up at the end. I'm sorry, Rob, one more. So I am privy to some of the emails you guys have exchanged that you may not know I saw, and at the end of one of them, you mentioned a squeeze. It actually is, I'll be expecting the promised bum squeeze when we're in New York City together. Do I want to know any more, or is that enough?
I think it's just fair to say that Az and I have had... we've got a very close relationship down the years, and we are not embarrassed to have even given a man hug in the office. We're just, we are Chandler and Joey.
All right.
Yeah, you are very much Chandler, there's no doubt about it.
I'll take it for being the funny one, but, he's also kind of like the weedy one, right? So, I kind of think I'm Chandler and Joey, and I just kind of let you kind of join in every now and again.
Oh, it's a side of Rob I didn't expect.
Oh, man. Right. Serious business. So as well as pestering me on WhatsApp so that I can't keep my notes straight for the race and having to answer you, that's also how we managed to hook you into coming on and doing this, which is, of course, the 100 Seconds of DRS, which I know you are massively looking forward to, Az.
I've been warming up, I've been practicing, and I have correct answers to all the right questions.
Well, since you are a friend of Rob's, I will administer the questions, which means, unfortunately, we have the least competent timer running the timing device, but we'll see if he can figure it out. Now, Rob, again, I've pointed this out. 60 seconds is a minute. 40 seconds is the overage to 100. 60 plus 40, 100. You can do this, right? Minute 40? You got it?
And is that still true now that gas prices have gone up so much? Do I have to put an allowance in for the
in this economy? Yeah, I think we're good. So, Az, are you ready, sir?
I was born ready.
Excellent. I'm ready, Rob. Count us in whenever you like. And just so you know, Az, I'm starting with the most important question first.
Okay, here we go. In 3, 2, 1, go.
Would you rather be chased by 1 horse-sized duck or 10 duck-sized horses?
10 duck-sized horses.
First poster you had on a bedroom wall?
Lee Majors as Steve Austin.
Oh, very nice. Who do you think's the best F1 driver on the grid today?
Unfortunately, Verstappen.
Unfortunately. And then I guess I'd ask the question: who do you think's the best F1 driver ever?
I'll go with Senna. It's a cliche, but yes.
No, that's a great answer. One more in a row on F1. Favorite track?
I think Spa, because I like wet weather and baths.
I don't know about the bats, but I love Spa. I love it. What's your favorite cheese?
Blue cheese. Ideally, gorgonzola.
Oh, fantastic answer. That's how I eat all my hamburgers. Question for you. This is very important. Is it pronounced GIF or JIF?
GIF, 100%.
GIF, you said, with a hard G? I like this guy already. Mario or Luigi?
Neither. It's actually Pac-Man.
Outside the box. So, what's your? If you're on a pit crew, what tire would you change?
Front left, because it's inside.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
How about your favorite non-motorsport sport?
Water polo, because it's the best sport in the world.
I've never even played water polo. Fantastic. Sleep in or up early?
Both, depending on circumstances. I'm weird.
What do you like to do on a rainy day?
Go out for a run.
In the rain?
Yeah.
And stop.
Oh, all right. Well, that was fantastic. So, first of all, GIF is 100% the right answer. The next question I would have had, and I'm going to ask it just because it's an important one of recent times, tires. Are they interesting or not, Az? And it's okay to say no, just know you'll fall down the rankings in my book very quickly.
So in a perfect world, tires should be boring because they should be irrelevant. But as Fiat have proven over and over in the last few races, tires are extremely important.
Tires are extremely important.
I say, but look at the wording there. Important, not interesting. They're
That's
just currently important. But one thing, Az, I knew when I knew that you were coming on this, I thought, we've got this rapid fire quiz where there's literally kind of a this or that type answer. And I thought if there's one person that we're going to get on that won't stick to the this or that, it was going to be you, and you didn't let me down.
Mario or Luigi? Pac-Man. I love it. I love it. Well, I got to say it's been awesome having you on, but I'm a little bummed I didn't get invited to the Bum Squeeze party, and not even by Rob. I mean, like, I host the podcast with this guy. I talk to him more than some of my kids. And I've never had the invitation. So I just think you two should be more inclusive of others in your squeezing situation.
I'm more than happy to invite you, but it requires first peeing together in the bushes. So,
well, then the entire poker game I was at last night would be included, so we'd be fine.
Yeah, sounds perfect.
Right, I think, and on that note, as we will close that out. So thank you ever so much for coming on, and keep pestering me during the races on WhatsApp, because it is fun, and it was good to see you again, actually. So look forward to New York in October.
Absolute pleasure to meet you, even though you're a friend of Rob's. And as always, if anyone's interested in being on the 100 Seconds of DRS, please let us know on Twitter at F1DirtySide, or you can send us email, dirtysideofthetrack@gmail.com. Az, thanks so much. It was an absolute pleasure meeting you.
Well, it's great meeting you guys, especially Brian.
Okay, that was always going to be that way. Az was always going to take the quick-fire questions and just rip them up and do it his own way. I love him to bits. I'm so glad we had him on, but I knew it was going to be like that. So, again, thank you, Az, for coming on and doing that. For anybody who wants to do the same thing, like we kind of just mentioned in the DRS section, then just please hit us up on Twitter, on the email, wherever you find us. Just let us know if you want to come on and do DRS, because we love talking to you guys, even our so-called friends.
Exactly. It was nice to meet Az as well, and I didn't know you had friends, as I said, so it was good to talk to one of them. But where there is no friendship in the world of fantasy, there's only competition. And Rob and I don't know how to say this. We pooped in the bed at best. This is a family-friendly show. So, yeah, bad weeks, man. Really bad weeks.
It's one of those weeks where, so you beat me, right? You beat me. But it's one
I
of those
didn't
ones
really
where...
win anything. I just didn't do as poorly as you. I did poorly. I did poorly, but not as poorly as you did. That's basically what it is.
So we've kind of alluded to this as we've gone through this. Let's break it down a little bit more. So after the FP2 and with kind of the strong positioning of certain drivers and the bad positioning of Leclerc, I decided to take a scalpel to my team. I hacked out Leclerc. I sold him off. I brought in, I think I ended up with Ocon, Gasly, Checo, Valtteri, and Red Bull.
And you turbo drove one of them, and it was
I turbo drove Checo.
So did I.
So
his -8 became a -16, although not as bad as listener Mark, who I did check through some of the Mega Drives. Mark from Detroit, my man, Team DLV, he Mega drove Checo, so he got -24. There's nothing better than tripling your negative. I mean, that is just, God, what a kick in the nads.
So I saw my score come through, and I had something like, I don't know, I basically had 0. No, I had 74. I mean, this is basically 0, right? So I'm like, oh God, there's no way I've beaten Brian this week. So I'm scrolling down the leaderboard.
Oh, I tried to make.
I know you did. You put in a valiant effort to be worse than me.
And I'm 87.
I'm scrolling. I'm seeing all these guys with 200 and 170. Oh my God, I'm gonna be rock bottom. And I'm keep going, and I'm not seeing you. And I think we both finished in the bottom 10. I mean,
no, not quite. I was 49th out of 66.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you had a stellar week.
The stats matter, baby. This is SAP stats. I'm not saying I was good, but I wasn't bottom 10. I was close.
Yeah.
Neither were you. You were 53rd, 74th. I had 87 points. It was a disaster. It was a disaster on all fronts. I went with a strategy of high quality and broad diversification. And what that meant was I had both Haas members, which cost me.
Well, no, which was looking awesome for a long time.
Yeah, after quali, I'm walking around like Vince McMahon, kind of doing the strut around my house. My family's like, "What's so good?" I'm like, "My team's looking great." And then what happened? Horrible. And so,
did you have Gasly in yours?
No, I didn't.
No, because so I'm like thinking, oh, he's looking so strong. I've got a rock star here. I've brought him on board, and then quali happens. I'm like, Gasly, I'm going to hunt you down.
Well, so Checo didn't finish, Mick didn't finish, Kevin finished last. But other than that, I had George and I had Carlos. So, I mean, I had 2 and 4. I'm not complaining. I mean, I know how to pick good guys. I just don't know how to turbo drive anyone or pick the rest. But anyway, enough about the people who suck. That's me and Rob. Let's talk about the people who didn't suck this week. And there were, as Rob said, people who still put it together, really hooked it up in a tough fantasy week, but an amazing race. So Avanish S, Team 1, finished first, 220 points. Amazing. Great job. Brandon P, Bosco, Team 1, second. Daniel Y, Booty Bandit Club, third. Andrew T with Alpha Tally, fourth. He's, I think, our overall leader. We'll get to that in a second. Tied at fourth. Ryan B with Can't Be Bothered to Make a Name, and also tied at fourth, 191 points. David T, which is one of my favorites, is Michael. I just sent you an email, and whenever we mention the team, we have to do.
Michael, I just send you an email.
I mean, that is the best sound you have. Roman M, Rampuri F1 team. Jillian N, Nothing to Lewis. Peter G, Scuderia Gates. Sophie M, Team 1. Paul G, Team 1. And Olivia M, No Regrets, Only Memories. All those last ones were tied for 9th. So great job to all of everyone we mentioned in the top 10. And that actually changes around a bit of the full season. I'll just hit the top 3 real fast. Andrew T, I mentioned already. Alpha Taylor at first. Tomas H, second. And then I am third, but hanging on by a string to third. My only hope is that I still haven't used my Mega Driver. And I'm really
hoping you Mega Drive. Whoever you Mega Drive, all I wish upon them
Negative?
is DNF. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Your support means the world to me.
Oh, I've got your back, Brian. Always got your back.
And by having my back, there's a knife in it. So thank you. And with that, with the fantasy recap, talking about the race, I think we just talk a little bit about what we're kind of hoping for next week. So Rob, why don't you hit a little bit of that and say thanks to everybody?
Yeah. So. We're hoping this happens. We think we've got it booked in for Tuesday this week. We're hoping we're going to be interviewing somebody that used to work on the Red Bull pit lane. So It'd be great to get another view from, we've had Pit Lane Paul, as always, fantastic. We've had Nate from the F1 journalistic side of things, and hopefully we're going to get a real-life Red Bull race engineer, or ex-Red Bull race engineer, on the show next week. So that will be super exciting if we can make that happen, Brian. I'm really looking forward to it.
What you didn't mention is another of our special guests, Duff McKagan from the rock and roll world.
Hey, this is Duff McKagan, and you're listening to the Dirty Side of the Track podcast.
Yeah, you are, Duff. So gotta dine out on that for a while. But
I mean, Guns N' Roses are touring Europe at the moment. He would have loved to have been on the show this week, but we just couldn't make this time schedules match.
He was gonna cancel the tour, but
he was. Yeah, he wanted to come on and be live on the pod.
Yeah, but couldn't make it happen. So special guest next week. We're hoping. We'll see if we can get that locked in for you for next Sunday. Great race this week.
And as well as the special guest, being as we don't have a race next week, so next week we'll do a preview of Silverstone that will be coming up. We should have enough time to do another round of Rob versus Brian, because if we can get another Rob versus Brian on the board, we lead into Silverstone, which is also the next race on our draft. So we got to stoke the competition up again, Brian.
I'm looking forward to it, as always. And I look forward to hearing all of the listener feedback. We do our best we can every week. We hope you do the same. Be well, be safe. Thank you so much for listening. Tell your friends. We're having a great time doing this. We hope you're having a great time listening. Everyone, be well. Thank you so much. Rob, close us out, man.
One final thing. Happy Father's Day, everyone.
Yes, very much so. Take care, everybody.